All right, so today we're diving into a pretty wild one. You know Abercrombie and Fitch, those
Yeah.
iconic moose logos,
Oh, with it.
hair thick with fierce cologne. And let's be real, those ads,
Yeah.
they practically invented the phrase sex sells.
Mm.
But what happens when the brand's steamy image collides with some truly disturbing allegations? Well, that's where we're headed today.
Yeah, it's a stark reminder that things aren't always what they appear to be, especially in the world of high fashion. We're going to unpack some seriously shocking news about former CEO Mike Jeffries, the man who built Abercrombie and Fitch into the powerhouse it is today.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, this one's a tough one to stomach. We're talking about sex trafficking charges, allegations of interstate prostitution. And it all circles back to the same man who built an empire on sex appeal. It's like something ripped from a true crime podcast, but unfortunately, it's all too real.
And what makes this case even more disturbing is the alleged exploitation of young men, many of whom were likely drawn to Abercrombie and Fitch because of that aspirational, hypersexualized image that the brand cultivated.
Okay, so let's break this down. The indictment against Jeffries paints a very dark picture. We're not just talking about a CEO making morally questionable decisions. These accusations suggest a calculated pattern of abuse.
Exactly. Prosecutors allege that Jeffries, along with his partner, Matt Smith, and an associate named James Jacobson, were involved in a scheme that preyed on young men, hoping to break into the modeling world.
We're here today to announce the arrest and charging of three defendants. Former CEO of Abercrombie and Fitch, Michael Jeffries, Matthew Smith, and James Jacobson, on charges of sex trafficking and engaging in interstate prostitution. Powerful individuals for too long have trafficked and abused for their own sexual pleasure young people with few resources and a dream of securing a successful career in fashion or entertainment. To anyone who thinks they can exploit and coerce others by using the so-called casting couch system, this case should serve as a warning. Prepare to trade that couch for a bed in federal prison.
Imagine this. You're a young, aspiring model, and someone like Jacobson approaches you, dangling the possibility of working with a huge brand like Abercrombie and Fitch. It sounds like a dream come true, right?
Absolutely. But according to the indictment, this was just the bait. These young men were allegedly lured into a web of manipulation and abuse, often under the pretense of attending industry parties, hosted by Jeffries and Smith.
And we're not talking about your average Fashion Week soiree. These parties, as alleged, were more like scenes from a nightmare. The indictment details claims of coercion, victims pressured to take alcohol, Viagra, even poppers. There are even allegations of victims being injected with substances against their will, all to heighten the party's disturbing atmosphere.
And to make matters worse, the indictment alleges that these young men were pressured into signing non-disclosure agreements, effectively silencing them and protecting their alleged abusers.
It's hard to wrap your head around the level of power and manipulation at play here. These young men, many of whom were probably still teenagers, were allegedly treated as objects, their aspirations and vulnerabilities ruthlessly exploited.
It's a classic case of using
Uh-huh.
power and allure to create an environment ripe for exploitation, and the fact that it allegedly happened within a brand that built its image on pushing boundaries and celebrating a certain kind of physicality. Well, it adds a whole other layer of disturbing complexity to the story.
It's like this whole narrative was hiding in plain sight. You know what's even more unsettling is this isn't the first time Abercrombie and Fitch has come under fire for questionable practices.
Yeah,
We all saw that White Hot documentary a couple of years ago.
right.
I mean, it exposed some pretty problematic stuff about their hiring practices, specifically around race.
You're right. White Hot definitely brought some uncomfortable truths to light about the company's culture and how it impacted people. But these current allegations go way beyond problematic. They point to a potentially criminal system of abuse, allegedly orchestrated by the very person at the helm of the company.
It's mind-blowing, really. And it gets even more convoluted when you factor in Mike Jeffries' connection to Les Wexner, you know, the Victoria's Secret model.
Now, that's a name that sends chills down your spine. The connection between Jeffries and Wexner is more than just a casual fashion world link. Wexner was Jeffries' mentor, the one who gave him his start in the industry, and eventually appointed him CEO of Abercrombie and Fitch back in the 90s.
You're kidding. It's like the plot of a bad movie,
Right.
except it's real life. I mean, think about the parallels. Both brands known for their overtly sexualized marketing. both targeting a young demographic, and now both with CEOs linked to these horrifying allegations of abuse and exploitation. It makes you wonder if there was something in the water, so to speak.
It's a haunting thought. It makes you question whether this went beyond just one company or one CEO, and if there was a broader cultural context at play. And let's not forget, Wexner's ties to Jeffrey Epstein only deepen this disturbing web of power and influence.
Absolutely. It's impossible to ignore that link. It's like looking at a tangled-up necklace. You pull one strand, and suddenly you realize just how deeply intertwined everything is.
And the deeper you dig, the more tangled it gets. This story is far from over. This isn't just a case of one bad apple. The allegations against Jeffries, if proven true, suggest a systemic failure that allowed this alleged exploitation to fester for years.
Absolutely. We're talking about a culture that often prioritizes profit and image over the well-being of individuals.
Exactly. And the fact that some victims are only coming forward now, years after the alleged abuse took place, well, that speaks volumes about the climate of fear and silence that often surrounds these cases.
It's a harsh reality check.
Yeah.
Especially for those of us who grew up with Abercrombie and Fitch, who might have even bought into that image they were selling. It's tough to reconcile that with the with the potential darkness lurking beneath the surface.
Yeah, it's a classic story of smoke and mirrors, isn't it? We're so often captivated by the illusion, the carefully constructed facade, that we forget to question what might be hiding behind it. And in the case of Abercrombie and Fitch, that facade was built on a foundation of sex appeal, exclusivity, and aspiration.
It's like those ads were almost too good to be true. The perfect bodies, the effortless cool, the implication that wearing that logo somehow made you part of something exclusive, even edgy.
And that's the genius and perhaps the insidiousness of their marketing. They tapped into something primal, something aspirational. But it seems the reality was far from aspirational, at least for some.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack, that's for sure. And I'm curious, where does Abercrombie and Fitch go from here? Can a brand that's been so defined by its image and its leadership ever truly recover from something like this?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? They've been trying to rebrand in recent years, tone down the overt sexuality, appeal to a broader audience. But can you really outrun a legacy like this?
Right. It makes you wonder about the responsibility of consumers, too. I mean, we vote with our wallets, right?
Absolutely. We have more power than we realize. And being informed. Digging a little deeper into the brands we support, that's where we can make a difference.
It's a wake-up call for all of us. This deep dive into Abercrombie and Fitch has been a roller coaster. We started with those iconic ads and ended up knee-deep in some seriously heavy stuff.
Yeah, it's a reminder that glamour can often mask a much darker reality. And while the legal process plays out, it's up to us to stay informed, keep asking the tough questions, and perhaps reevaluate our own relationship with the brands that shape our world.
Well said.